She wakes up at 6 a.m. No one to answer to, no one's mood to read, no one to shrink herself for. She makes coffee exactly the way she likes it. She watches what she wants. She sleeps in the middle of the bed, and on paper, according to everything society told her she should want, she should be miserable. She's alone. But here's what nobody wants to admit. She's not miserable. She's thriving, and that terrifies people. Not because something is wrong with her, but because if she's happy alone, it means something deeply uncomfortable. It means the story we've been selling women for centuries might be wrong. Today we're going into territory most psychology channels won't touch, because this topic makes people angry. It makes people defensive. It makes people uncomfortable. Good, because the truth usually does. Stay with me. For as long as anyone can remember, there has been one story about women who live alone. They're waiting for the right person, waiting for the life to begin, waiting to be complete. Single at 30 means something went wrong. Single at 35 means she's too difficult. Single at 40 means she missed her chance. The language around women who live alone has always been about lack, what she doesn't have, what she hasn't found, what she failed to build. But here is where the story starts to crack. A 2024 Harvard study found that single women who live alone report higher levels of personal freedom, self-development, and life satisfaction than married women in unhappy or neutral relationships. Let that sit for a moment. Not higher than everyone, higher than women who are partnered but unfulfilled, which means the question was never really, is she alone? The question was always, is she free? Here is what actually happens to a woman psychologically when she builds a life entirely on her own terms. First, she develops what psychologists call a secure internal base. This means her sense of safety, her sense of worth, her sense of identity stops being tied to another person's presence. Most people never develop this. Most people spend their entire lives outsourcing their emotional stability to someone else. If he's happy, she's okay. If he's distant, she spirals. If he leaves, she falls apart. But a woman who has lived alone, who has sat with herself in silence, who has faced every hard night without someone to lean on, she builds something different. She builds a relationship with herself. And a woman who has that is one of the most psychologically stable people you will ever meet. Second, she develops radical self-knowledge. When there is no one else in the house, you cannot distract yourself from yourself. You find out what you actually enjoy, what actually makes you laugh, what actually makes you feel alive, versus what you performed because someone else was watching. Most people never discover the difference because they were never alone long enough to find out. Before we go further, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever been in a relationship and felt more alone than when you were actually alone? If the answer is yes, drop yes in the comments right now, because what I'm about to tell you next explains exactly why that happens. Here is the uncomfortable truth about loneliness. Being alone and feeling lonely are not the same thing. Research consistently shows that some of the loneliest people on Earth are people in relationships, specifically people in relationships where they cannot be themselves, where they have to manage their partner's emotions, where they have to shrink their ambitions, where they have to perform a version of themselves that keeps the peace, where they pour everything into someone who pours very little back. That is a specific kind of lonely, a lonely that is invisible, a lonely you can't explain because, from the outside, you have someone. And women who have left that specific kind of lonely and chosen their own company instead consistently report one thing: the silence was not empty. The silence was a relief. Society has one response to a woman who is thriving alone. She must be hiding something. She must be damaged. She'll change her mind. She's just saying she's fine. Wait until she gets older. She doesn't know what she's missing. Notice something. Every single one of those responses is about refusing to believe her, refusing to accept that her experience is real, refusing to accept that what she has built is enough. Psychologists call this social invalidation, and it is applied almost exclusively to women who choose differently. A man who lives alone at 40 is a bachelor, mysterious, independent, interesting. A woman who lives alone at 40 is a warning, a cautionary tale, something that went wrong. That double standard is not accidental. It is a control mechanism, because a woman who does not need a relationship to feel complete is a woman who cannot be controlled by the fear of being alone. And that changes every negotiation she will ever have, with a partner, with an employer, with anyone. Let's talk about what the actual research says, because this is where the conversation gets really uncomfortable for people who want to keep the old story alive. Women who live alone are more likely to pursue higher education and career advancement than women who prioritize finding a partner in their early 20s. Women who live alone report significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression than women in low-quality relationships. Women who live alone have stronger and more fulfilling friendships than both married women and single men. Women who leave unsatisfying relationships and choose to live alone report that within 2 years they would not go back. Not because they hate relationships, but because they discovered something on the other side of that decision that nobody told them was waiting, themselves, fully, for the first time. Now here is where people get angry, because every time this conversation happens, the same arguments arrive. Argument 1, she'll die alone. This one is designed to activate fear, the image of an old woman with no one at her side. But here's what the data actually shows. Women have stronger social networks than men. Women maintain deeper friendships over their lifetimes. Women are more likely to have meaningful community connections. The person who statistically dies alone is not the woman who chose her own life. It's the man who spent his entire life depending on a woman to be his entire social world, and then lost her. Argument 2, she's selfish. Let's examine this one carefully. When a woman prioritizes her own life, her own goals, her own peace, she is called selfish. When a man does the exact same thing, he is called ambitious. The word selfish, applied to women who choose themselves, is not a moral observation. It is a punishment for not being available. Argument 3, she's just bitter. This is perhaps the most revealing argument of all, because it assumes that any woman who chooses to be alone must have been hurt into that choice, must be operating from wound, must be running from something rather than toward something. It cannot possibly be that she looked at her options clearly, evaluated the actual cost of certain relationships, and made a rational, informed decision. That possibility is too threatening, because if it's a rational decision, then it's a valid one. And if it's valid, the entire framework collapses. Here is the psychological core of everything we've discussed today. The reason women who live alone are so threatening to so many people is not because something is wrong with them. It's because something is right with them, something that most people are still working to find. They have answered the most important question a human being can answer. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually want when I stop performing for an audience? What does my life look like when I build it entirely from the inside out? Most people never answer these questions, not because they couldn't, but because they were never alone long enough to have to. And here's the thing about women who live alone. They didn't choose isolation. They chose sovereignty. There is an enormous difference. Isolation is the absence of connection. Sovereignty is the presence of self. And a woman who has sovereignty can choose connection from a place of genuine desire rather than desperate need, which means when she does choose a relationship, if she chooses one, she chooses it clearly, without fear, without settling, without performing. and she will accept nothing less than something that actually adds to a life that is already full. Now, here is where I want to say something that will make some people deeply uncomfortable. This is not an anti-relationship video. This is not a video telling women to be alone. This is a video about something far more important: the difference between choosing your life and having your life chosen for you by fear. Because here is the truth about many relationships that nobody says out loud. Many of them are not built on love. They are built on the terror of being alone, on the social shame of being uncoupled, on the biological clock pressure, on the fear that this might be the last option, on the exhaustion of the search. Those are not foundations. Those are emergencies. And a relationship built on emergency eventually reveals itself as exactly that. A woman who lives alone, who has sat with herself, who has built something real from the inside out. She does not enter relationships from emergency. She enters from wholeness. And the difference between those two starting points determines everything that comes after. So what is the truth about women who live alone? The truth is that many of them are not waiting. They are not broken. They are not damaged. They are not hiding. They are not bitter. They made a decision, maybe consciously, maybe gradually, maybe after a relationship that cost them more than it gave, maybe simply because their own company turned out to be the best company they'd ever kept. And that is not a tragedy. That is not a failure. That is not something that went wrong. That is someone who found out who they were before they let someone else define it for them. The real question is not why she lives alone. The real question is why that makes so many people so uncomfortable. And the answer to that question tells you everything about who benefits from women being afraid of their own company. If this video made you think, if it made you feel something, if it made you want to argue with me in the comments, good. Drop your thoughts below. Agree or disagree. I want to hear where you land on this, because this conversation matters. Give this video a like if it said something nobody else is saying. Subscribe to MindForge for psychology that goes where most channels won't. And share this with one woman in your life who has been made to feel like something is wrong with her for simply choosing herself. See you in the next one.